Thank you, Roger. And let me express my gratitude to Karen also for a moment. Something I really appreciate about this church, and to the extent you pay attention to this, I'm not certain, but I think it's important, and I don't say this because it was my son up here that was leading the choir a while ago, but I think it's important that as a church we are providing opportunities for younger generations to begin to use their gifts. And I think, and I hope you value the fact that you'll see children up here that are participating and leading and using their gifts, playing the piano, or they are singing, or they are playing the bass, or like Chris, he's got no talent, but he's over here on the drums, and so it concerns me because too many times I think the Christian church in the United States has become so performance-based. It just is. And this is not a concert. This is not for your entertainment. This is about us using what God has given us, expressing back to God what we believe to be true about Him, whether that's an older person, whether that's a younger person. And I think that's what New Testament church looks like. And I'm grateful that we are seeing that here. And so I hope that you value that. Karen, thank you for your intentionality in that. Not only am I grateful for that, I'm also grateful for Asian food. And I just like that for a segue. And by Asian food, at least the Americanized expressions of it. And so whether it's Thai food, or at least the Thai food that I eat, I like it. Japanese food, or like, especially if you go to the Japanese restaurant and you know that I call it Japanese gravy, that white sauce that they give you, which is just essentially mayonnaise, and I don't know what it is. It's terrible for you, but it's delicious. And so like teriyaki, that stuff is so good. I love like Chinese food. I really like all of those. That is really, really, really good. And most of the time, not most of the time, if I have Chinese food, and over the years, and thankfully it has become very, very infrequent if I experience Chinese food, but over the years I have been a number of times to a Chinese buffet, and I appreciate, and there's a special place in my heart, and it's a clogged place in my heart, but there's a special place in my heart for a Chinese buffet. And it's kind of a love-hate relationship that I have with them. And the love part is because there's so many options. I mean, there are some of these Chinese buffets around town, I mean, they're just huge, all of these different options that they have. And there's so many things that I like, and all of those, especially those things, all those chicken dishes that are fried in those sweet sauces that, you know, I'm sure Chinese don't actually eat that, but we do, and they're just all delicious. And the fried rice and the lo mein, and now there's all kinds of fish stuff. And I'm not, if it swims or used to swim, I'm not interested in any of that. But all this other stuff, I really, really, really like that. And so I very much appreciate a Chinese buffet. But so I put all that stuff on the love side. But I have kind of a love-hate relationship, and so on the negative side, I put this. When I leave, I feel like I need to be carted out in a wheelbarrow. And so I just feel so miserable. And part of the reason for that is that it has, over time, the prices have, well, for everything, prices have gone up for everything. But part of the fact is that Chinese buffets, many of them have incorporated things like crab legs and all this stuff that I don't want to eat that. And all you people eating all that bottom feeder stuff, I'm not interested in eating that nasty stuff, but y'all like it. And so people like me are having to pay for it, but I don't want to eat it. And so because of that, I'm paying a premium to get all this access to this stuff that I don't want. So here I am, and whatever the price is, I'm thinking, all right, it's $18 or whatever it is. I've got to eat $18 worth before I get full. And so the race begins. And it really does become a race. And I don't know if it's like that for you. And Any other restaurant you go to, it's not like that. You just order something, you eat it, you enjoy it. I go to a Chinese buffet, it's like, I mean, it's just this race that is going on. And it's I love it, but I hate it at the same time. But it is a race, and a race by definition has some essential ingredients, doesn't it? It has a start and it has a finish. There are, by definition, there is something that is potentially gained. There is something that is potentially lost. So I am trying to gain as much food without losing much. There's a start, there's a finish. It is a race. And there's a lot of things in life that we can compare to a race. And to the extent you've paid attention to it or you have read what the Bible says about this, I don't know, but the reality is that God has gone on record and used the Apostle Paul to compare your relationship with Him to being a race. Now, we're going to be thinking about that today and next Sunday in a little short series that we're calling The Games. And we're thinking about that in part because the Olympics are going on. And many of you have been paying attention or not paying attention, but you're aware all of this stuff is going on. But it's not accidental. It's very intentional that God went on record to compare our relationship with Him in very overt, very specific language to a race. And if He did that, He did so because He wanted to convey something of importance to us. And if our walk with Him, if our experience, if our relationship with Him is like a race, what's the consequence of that fact? What's the consequence of my relationship or your relationship with Him being called a race? Look with me in your Bibles to where it's called that in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, starting with verse 24. 1 Corinthians 9, starting with verse 24. Paul starts with a question, and he says, "Don't you know that the runners in a stadium all race, but only one receives the prize? Run in such a way to win the prize. Now, everyone who competes exercises self-control in everything. They do it to receive a perishable crown, but we an imperishable crown. So I do not run like one who runs aimlessly or box like one who is beating the air. Instead, I discipline my body and bring it under strict control so that after preaching to others, I myself will not be disqualified." It's pretty clear. God's using Paul here to describe his relationship, your relationship, my relationship with the Lord. If you have, and if you say, "I am a follower of Jesus," you have a personal relationship with Christ, he says that your relationship with Him is like a race. Well, if that's a fact, what's the consequence of it? Well, based on what he says here, the first thing I would say is this: your Christian life actually matters. You might say, well, duh. It's a simple thought, but I'm telling you, it's altogether important. Get this straight in your mind. Your Christian life, your relationship with God, it actually matters, which is to say, it has real and meaningful consequence. Now, Paul is writing to a group of believers in the city of Corinth. Corinth in the first century was a very important city. It was strategically located. It was at a crossroads of major trade. It was a big city. And because of that, you had all sorts of trade and commerce and lots of population. It was thought to be a pretty cultured city, and we were well-to-do. It's interesting also that in Greek culture, there were 4 regular games that were going on. There were the Olympic Games that occurred. There were the Pythian Games, there were the Nemean Games, and then in the city of Corinth, there were the Isthmian Games. I guess they quit doing that because nobody could say it, but the Isthmian Games. Dun, 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 dun. The Isthmian Games. That was fun to say. Anyway, every 2 years, they would have the Isthmian Games in the city of Corinth. And so it's interesting, potentially, Paul is writing to a group of people, and maybe those games are actually going on as he's writing. And maybe he is intentionally writing them because that's on their mind. That in the stadium, there in the city, these games are going on. It's a big deal, and people are aware of it. Or maybe they're getting ready to happen. But Regardless, these are people who are mindful of, regularly thinking about athletic competition and sport, where people would be competing against each other. And he says, again, to these believers, hey, you are aware of this, that people running in a race, they're in a stadium. You've seen this here in our own city. You've seen it in our own in the city of Corinth, that people are running a race, but only one receives the prize. And so he says, I want you to run in such a way as to actually win the prize. Now, before going further, let me say this. Paul is using an illustration. By definition, an illustration it's a word picture. It's an illustration. It's not more than that, but it's also not less than that. You must keep that in mind, because sometimes what you can do with an illustration is to push it too far, and by doing so, you can lead it or have it lead you to conclusions that are beyond what is actually being said. So what I want you to realize is that in communicating this, Paul is not saying, with respect to comparing your relationship with Christ to a race, you win it or you lose it. And so, well, if you win it, you get to go to heaven. And if you lose it, well, you won't need a jacket. That's not what he's saying. That's pressing the illustration too far. Paul is suggesting that we ought to do something and that we ought to live our life as a follower of Christ in such a way that we might win the prize, which is to say that there is something that can actually be gained. And if something can be gained, it suggests by definition that something also can be lost, that something can be done victoriously and that something cannot be done victoriously, that there are those that are winners and there are those that are losers at something. Now, unfortunately and increasingly in our society, we are seeing, especially among the youngest of ages, pushback against competition. Or at least what I would describe as normal competition. Normal competition says that you have people that compete in something and somebody wins and somebody loses. Our culture doesn't seem to like that. Everybody gets a sticker. We don't keep score. Yay! Give everybody flippers and we all win. Isn't that great? We're creating generations of pansies. Let's just stop that, because that's not life. Because by the time you get to teenage years, certainly by the time you get to adulthood, all of a sudden the curtain gets pulled back and you realize in life, people win and people lose. It just happens. That's how life operates. It just does. Paul says, listen, you know in a race that there are people that actually win and there are people that actually lose. And he says with respect to the Christian life that it can be run in a way such that you can gain something. And if something can be gained, if it can be done in such a way that it is done victoriously, by definition that supposes it can be done in such a way as to say that something cannot be gained. It can be done in ways that are not victorious. Now, this does not mean that you win and somebody else is losing. As you and I are running our race, as you are living your life as a follower of Christ, I'm not competing against you. You're not competing against me. It's not like, let me see, Jamie's catching up to me. I better memorize another verse. That's not how we're doing this. We're not in competition with each other. What it is that there is a path that God has for me. I am in my lane, and I am running not against you, but I am running. The judge, God himself, is watching the rule book. He is watching the lane. He is watching me, and it is just me with my assigned race before him, irrespective of you. Your race is irrespective of mine. Our races are done alongside each other, but we're not done doing this in competition with each other. That being said, there is opposition and there is pushback. That's why he says in verse 26, he says, I'm not running like someone who is running aimlessly. Like it's not as though I'm just out, well, I'm going to run this. No, there's a course, there's a direction. I'm running with plan and purpose and intent. I'm not boxing as though I'm shadow boxing and just beating the air. I actually, as a follower of Christ, I have an enemy. I have pushback. I have Satan working against me. I have the drift of culture that is pushing against me. I have real opposition that I am experiencing. The stakes are real. This is not an actual game. And by virtue of what he's saying here, what I am doing, very simply, this stuff matters. Let me say it again. What I am doing, what you are doing as a follower of Christ, this life that we're called to, following him, and I know this sounds just so profoundly elementary, but it is so true. And so many times we miss this very simple step. This stuff actually matters. And unfortunately, we operate as though everything else does, and this doesn't. Years ago, I guess it was, I don't know, I don't know what you'd call them, the 20 teens, some 2010 and beyond. Facebook at that point was becoming pretty big. Many of you had Facebook pages at that point. Some of you remember, some of the younger ones may not, but do you remember Farmville? Some of you remember Farmville. Farmville was kind of interesting, and some of you may have to look it up, but it was interesting. It existed on Facebook. It was kind of strange. Farmville, it was free-ish, and so if you had a Facebook account, you could get you create a Farmville account, and you would get your own virtual farm. And so you'd have this plot of virtual land, and every day you could earn credits. With these credits, you could get corn and beans and chickens, or I don't know what else. I never got a farm. Anyway, but you could get this, and you could have a normal farm. But beyond that, you could get other stuff, though, too. And my parents somehow got into this. It was like a pyramid scheme. It was really strange. But you could get a windmill. You could get a Statue of Liberty. I remember my dad had a Statue of Liberty in his Farmville garden. It was very strange. But once you had this stuff, you had to tend it. And so you would have to weed your garden. You would have to go in daily, and you would have to water your garden when it was time, when the harvest would come in. I don't know what the Statue of Liberty would produce. I don't know but you'd have to shine it. I don't know what you'd do anyway. But you would have to tend all of this stuff. And by doing so, you would earn more credits to expand your garden. And people got into this. In fact, you could actually buy credits, take real money to buy more credits, to buy more virtual stuff so that you could, it was crazy. Some of you remember this, and you need to confess this to God, that you were ensnared in Farmville. And I remember my dad, he was kind of joking about this, but he kind of wasn't. Talking about needing to get home because he needed to water his garden. And he wasn't talking about his garden, he was talking about Farmville. And we're like, what? And you want to say, that's not real. What's your Statue of Liberty going to do? Wilt? That stuff it just doesn't matter. We live busy lives. We all do. And in the course of busyness, sometimes it is the case that we don't stop long enough to evaluate. And we don't stop long enough to evaluate meaning. We don't stop long enough to evaluate importance. My encouragement for you, even just briefly, is to think about your life right now, just as a person who's a follower of Christ. When you think about the things that occupy your time, that occupy your attention, that occupy your finances, that occupy your affections, that occupy your thoughts, where is your relationship with God on the radar? Is it even on the list? Truth be told, for all too many of us, it's all this other junk. It is. It's stuff that doesn't matter. Listen to what Paul says. We're not running to receive a perishable crown. Think about all the stuff that you're running for in life and how much of it is perishable. All that time, all that effort, all that energy, and how much of that's going to last. Again, it's so simple, but so simple so many times that we just skip over it. God was intentional in communicating to us, to me, to you, that my life, that your life with Him is like a race. Because He wants me to know, He wants you to know that your Christian life, your relationship with Him, it actually matters. There can be actual, real, meaningful, lasting gain, or you can miss. You can forfeit reward so that you can have something that what? Doesn't last. It's of consequence that He called our life with Him a race, because our Christian life matters, and because of this other thought. Discipline is of utmost concern. Discipline is of utmost concern. In keeping with this competition imagery, Paul says in verse 25 that everyone who competes exercises self-control in everything. And he says that they're doing this to receive a perishable crown. What's interesting is that in the Isthmian Games, they weren't trying to win a medal. Like in the Olympics, you're trying to win a medal. You know what they were trying to win in the Isthmian Games? A wreath of wilted celery. How about them apples? Ooh, go for the celery. Go for the celery. Anyway, so that's what they were going for. He says, well, we're not going after wilted celery. We're pursuing something that has eternal consequence. And so he says that someone who competes, they exercise self-control in everything. Now, you don't have to be an athlete like me to be able to identify properly with what he's saying here. But you understand, it's interesting, especially if you watch the Olympics, though, and some of these people, it's crazy. Like, you look at Simone Biles, she is like a python. I mean, she's just like pure muscle, and like, she is insane. And it's just insane. These athletes, they have a body fat percentage of like, I don't know, it's like negative. I mean, it's just insane. And to get to that level of athleticism and to get to that level of competition, well, they have, according to what Paul says, they've had to exercise all sorts of self-control. All sorts of self-control. Put it another way, that they've had to experience all sorts of discipline. You know, discipline is an interesting word, isn't it? Because for us, at least in English, it exists both in noun and verb form, doesn't it? And As a parent, we think about discipline in the verb form. You think about disciplining your child, or you get frustrated if you're out and about or you're somewhere and you see a child and you want to discipline that child, correct? And so you see, but with your own child, you verb discipline them. I don't know why I did that. I have no idea where that... Anyway, you verb discipline them, which is to say that you act in ways to control their behavior so that they have what? Discipline, the noun. He says that athletes operate in such a way, they discipline themselves, they verb form discipline themselves so that they have what? Discipline, control over their bodies. Like Simone Biles, it's crazy. She's like 2 feet tall, but can bounce off of a springboard like 30 feet in the air. It's just insane what she can do. And the reason that is the case is because she has disciplined herself such that now she has such control over herself so that now all of these things are possible. Paul says that's how those that are paying attention and realize what they are engaged in actually is of concern, that they practice discipline so that they have discipline, so that they have control. They do this so that, according to verse 27, after preaching to others, he says, I myself will not be disqualified. We do this so that we want reward. We operate so that we will finish our leg of the race, and the one before whom we are running will reward us for the manner in which we have operated this race before him. And it's not so that we can get withered celery, but so that he might praise us, so that he might be pleased by us. And we are doing this, he says, with discipline. We are going to be doing this intentionally, operating, seeking to control urges, and unfortunately, many times having to tell ourselves, no, I'm not going to do that so that I can do this. And that's how athletes work, isn't it? That so many times you're having to say, I'm going to say no to this so that I can say yes to that. I'm going to say yes to exercise so that I can say, but if I'm going to say yes to exercise, I'm going to have to say no to just being a couch potato. I'm going to have to say yes to eating, but I'm going to have to say no to eating gravy biscuits. So it's saying yes, and so it's operating with control so that you can experience discipline and control to accomplish the desired result, because this stuff actually matters. And he says, I want to do this so that after preaching to others, I myself will not be disqualified. Paul has and understands this, and hopefully you do as well, that as I am living my race, as I am running my race, as you are running your race, you are not going to be doing so in such a way where you don't have impact on others' races. That we are going to be living for Christ, and we're going to be following him in ways where we're going to be talking to others. We're going to be engaging others. And we're going to be sharing with others about what it is that we have learned, and what it is that we have discovered, and what it is that we have read, and what it is that the one that we're following has said to us. And he says, I want to make sure that I operate in such a way, with such discipline and control, so that after sharing with others, he says, I don't want myself, to be disqualified. As of last year, Gateway Church in Texas, just outside of Fort Worth, averaged 25,804 people on Sundays. 25,804. As of last year, it was the 9th largest church in the United States. It started in 2000. It met for the first time in a hotel, a Hilton Hotel in Grapevine, Texas. Robert Morris was its founder, and since 2000 has experienced just amazing, astounding, catastrophic, meteoric growth. Morris had not kept it a secret that as part of his past, there had been a consensual yet out of bounds relationship at some point early on in his marital life, and had even written about it, though not in much detail, but had been through some what he described as restoration process and had effectively learned his lesson. Long story short, maybe you have read some of the news stories or heard about some of the things that have been going on with respect to that, but it has not been good as of late. The extramarital relationship that he had occurred back in the late 80s when he was in his early 20s, and though it was consensual, it lasted for 4 years, and the young lady that he had this consensual relationship with was 12 years old when it started. It's horrible. It has rocked the church. Obviously, he has been removed. I anticipate that criminal charges are forthcoming. Attendance is down by more than half. The black eye that it has given that church is staggering. The black eye that it has given the Christian community in that region is enormous. The black eye that it gives the church in America is not inconsequential. To say that he is disqualified is an understatement. And how did it happen? Verse 27, I discipline my body, I bring it under strict control, so that after preaching to others, I myself will not be disqualified. Listen, the easiest thing to do is to talk about this stuff. The easiest thing to do is to say, this is what you ought to do. This is what God says we ought to do. But God is not just interested in me sharing with others his standards. God is not merely interested in you sharing with others his expectation and encouraging others. He's interested in you also running your race. And if there is the lack and the absence of discipline, everything that you do, every aspect of your race will be called into question, and every aspect of Robert Morris's ministry, do you know what he will be forever remembered for? What I just described to you. Ravi Zacharias, same thing. Jim Baker, Jimmy Swaggart. It's a lengthy list. What will these individuals be remembered for? What I'm telling you, discipline is of utmost concern. And it's not just preachers. It's for every one of us, because every one of us is running the race. Your race matters. And discipline is of utmost concern. Will you bow your heads with me?